The number one thing I think about when I'm recording a drummer or myself playing drums, I will always take the best musician I can find first. That is the number one thing. If you have a great drummer on a terrible kit, you can still make a great recording. And then it goes on and on. I'll take a great drummer, a great kit, then great microphones, then great preamps and converters, and then a great space. Rooms are truly important, but if you have someone that is not very good at their instrument, it's very hard to make something sound good. Hi, my name is Dylan Wood. I work at Splice as an operations manager on the music production team. I've made sample packs for years now, about 5 of them, and I've worked in music for 20 years, recording and playing drums and other instruments. I'm going to show you all the tips I've learned over the years and some kind of quirky things that I like to do when recording drums for sample packs specifically. This is one of my favorite kits I've ever played. My blue Ludwig Standard, it's a blue Strata, and I've had it for so many years. It's definitely very mid-rangey, very knocky, and lends itself to a lot of different styles because it's vintagey, but it still has like a modern sound. I think there's a lot of drummers that have like mixed feelings about dampening their drums. It really depends on the sample pack I'm doing. If I want like really punchy drum machine sounding drums, I love the T-Towels. It's a huge part of my sound. And also we've been dampening drums for like 100 years. So I think it's very reasonable to think that it's not going out of style. I do have a snare weight also. You can use a wallet, you can use anything heavy. A lot of people use like cymbals or just honestly, anything with mass you can put on your snare to dampen it. For Splice, I use quite a lot of mics on my drums. When I'm recording at home, I actually use maybe 1 mic. I use maybe 1 to 3 mics. I'm a huge fan of like minimalist setups too. And you can get them to sound modern, you can get them to sound vintage. Naturally, like the less mics you use, the more natural they will sound, unless you start like chopping things up. If you had to do 1 microphone, something very cheap, very affordable, I would definitely experiment with this position right here. This was microphoneparts.com 251, like the V251. I built this microphone myself. If I had to have like 1 large diaphragm condenser, it would probably be the 251. The reason why I'm using a clone here instead of one that we actually have at Sound Factory is that I'm going to be playing drums, and I do not want to be banging my sticks around like $20,000, $30,000 microphones. This is about $1,000. I love condensers on toms. These are my 414 BULSs, and I've had these since I was maybe like 16 years old. I love these. They sound fantastic. They have the nylon capsules, but they sound really good, especially for that kind of like drum machine sound. Like the sub energy that you can get from a condenser just sounds awesome. If I had to have like a pair of microphones that were my only microphones I ever had, these vintage KM86s are incredible. Anything that you put in front of them, they literally just sound like what's in the room. You don't need, we have a Pro Tools rig in here. Absolutely do not need that to make samples. As long as you have an interface, decent mic, and that could be a $100 microphone, a decent drum set, and a decent person, you know what I mean? You don't need much. We get to like work in these great rooms, but I haven't always. I've worked in my, garage for 20 years. If you have a small room, it can be challenging and it can be weird, but the Lindrum snare was recorded in a literal closet. It was recorded in a closet, one of the best sounding snares in the world, used on countless records, amazing sounding snare sound, and it was in a closet. I think that's important to remember. You don't need a huge room. I would recommend experimenting with treatment and dampening and hanging blankets if that's all you have. I think it's important to work with what you have rather than against. I remember I was recording this drummer one time, and it was such a challenging time because they play drums so differently than me. I have a pretty heavy touch on the drums and light touch on the cymbals, and they were almost opposite. They had a very light touch on the drums and heavier on the cymbals. And I tried to set them up with like a multi-mic setup like this, and it sounded horrible. It sounded so terrible. When I was mixing it, I could not get it to work. And finally I soloed the snare, was like, oh, that actually sounds amazing by itself. I don't need any other microphone. And then I EQ'd that microphone to get that kick drum and the hi-hat in there a little bit more. And it ended up turning out amazing. It's like one of my favorite drum sounds I've ever made in my life. And I thought, I struggled with it so much because I was fighting against like what was naturally there. Trying to fight like hum or noise or crickets or like anything. And as soon as I started to like really embrace those differences in, drums and players and anything, it really helped make things sound a lot better and more interesting. If you listen to a record and it has like perfect frequency response or like flat frequency response, it's gonna sound terrible. It's gonna sound awful. You would never, it's not gonna sound interesting. Pick out anything that you listen to and that you like are excited about when you're listening to music, and there's gonna be a focus. It could be a vocal or a snare sound or a beautiful guitar, but I'll always have something. That's like what makes a great recording. And it's really important to find those and embrace those. That is the important part of mixing, is finding the soul of the song. I do encourage everyone to try to make sample packs. Make sample packs, having your own samples, it's a really wonderful tool to have. But there are some things to like consider when you're making these things. Drums especially, there is a lot to think about. You'll notice that I don't have a crash cymbal here. I don't know if you've ever gotten a drum loop with a crash in it. Every time that loop loops, you will hear that crash. And so unless you're able to extend it, if it's a 2-bar loop with a crash, you're basically cooked. You are done. Like you basically have a crash loop. And that is fine, but that is not what I'm trying to do. I try to make the most usable drums that I can. That's not to say that there's not like a place for like complicated drums or anything like that, but I want my drums to basically be played in a way to where they fit with basically anything. I do have a ride. Rides are fine, but what you'll end up like wondering is like, am I gonna crash it gently so that it can be heard every single time? Consistency is key when recording drums for a sample pack. You don't want it to sound like a loop. You want it to sound like interesting enough to where it changes and doesn't sound stagnant and boring. But you also want it to be interesting enough to where someone hears that and they're like, I need to have that loop. You don't want to just record like the same thing over and over again. Generally, I'll put on a click, pick a tempo. In packs, I usually do 4 max tempos, but like people expand that. People do 10 tempos, 20 tempos. I generally like to have about 20 minutes of just jamming out. Once I know that I got that take, I will actually stop before the following beat. When I stop, I'm not hitting that kick. I'm not hitting that kick. A lot of people stop with a kick or a beat, go into the next beat. It's gonna make it a pain to edit. Now I have endless space and like a little bit of resonance from the drums to work with. You know, I'm gonna be editing these. Like no matter how good of a take I do, it might be like a little nudge. Maybe it is perfect and I don't need to touch it. But for me, I do want like very punchy, very drum machine sounded drums. And so I will edit it and I will do everything in my power to make the editing very easy for me. When you're making a sample pack, you don't want to record the drums in a way that they are so processed that no one else can process them. I want to make a sound, and then if y'all need to mix it further, you can. You know, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't experiment with like making really bold samples, but I don't want it to be so set in its ways that it's like, it can only be used for like one type of song, one type of track. You know, I want someone to be able to break it down and use it for like at least 3 different genres. So when you're making the samples, you don't want to cook them too much on the way in. You don't want to overcook your drums. That's like, if there's like a #1 like do's or don'ts for making sample packs, do not overcommit to something if you want to be able to use it for like a lot of different genres. If I record, let's say I'm not recording for a specific pack, I could do an hour, 2 hours of these drums. That could be used for 3 different packs, all different genres. If I'm really set in my ways with like that tone, let's say I am doing that kind of like 60s thing, 3 microphones, summed into like a mono channel with like the plate. If that's all that someone has to work with, I can, you know, give them breaks. They might work for like a few like, you know, drum and bass genres, something like that. But with this setup, I could do that. I could do indie. I could do Americana, country, bedroom pop. I could do basically any sort of, you know, thing with this. If I change just the snare alone to, we have like a Sonar like breakbeat snare, I could literally do like a big beat, like drum and bass pack, something like that right off the bat. And I'm not committed to the sound so much right now to where I couldn't change that. I'm gonna record some drums, just some simple beats so that I have something to show you how to like mix and process these into like final samples. Now that I got my drums, I'm gonna actually start with like normalizing each audio file. I like working from like things that are consistent. I might normalize them to like -6, -10, something like that, just so I have room to work. But I love having the files all the same general area so I know what I'm doing. Right off the bat, I might start kind of like muting tracks that I know I'm not going to need. Since I do want it to be a little bit more dry, I'm going to start removing some of that like overhead sound in some of those rooms. I do record them because if like I want to crush them later or get like a really big drum sound, I can, but not right now. That's not the vibe I'm going for. The hi-hat's really loud, so that's sounding nice. So just level alone, I'm really trying to like focus my mixing there. If I want that more crispy snare, I'll bring the snare bottom up. But this is getting somewhere nice already. Now I'm gonna do some like editing to like really tighten that up. I like doing my editing by hand. It takes a second, but I can do it pretty fast for like a beat like this. Generally do keep it on the beat pretty good. But one thing that I really like about this is that I can now manually gate my drums, and that sounds really cool, and you'll see what I mean by that in 1 second. So now that I got all these, take these, set it to 1/8 note resolution, and now it's quantized. It's probably gonna sound a little funky right now, and you can see I might get some weird little stuff over here. So I like to go back and make sure that I do not get any of those weird little tails. I'll always go back over. There are faster ways to do this, but I really like to know exactly what's going on with every single transient, every single drum hit. This way I can kind of like keep an eye on what's happening. Some stuff like this, for instance, it's a little behind the beat. If I want this really tight, I'm actually going to take all those kicks now. I'm going to mute those. So yeah, so I'm just starting to get that snare by itself. It's gonna get really tight sounding. None of that bleed. Like, it's something you can do. There's like great gates that can do this, but I really like having the control of doing it manually. Like, I just have always found that to be better. So right off the bat, I can see where the kick is not, because I can now see where I took out those the kicks from the snare. So I'm just gonna do the opposite here. Getting tighter and tighter. No, I'm gonna hit Pro Q. I do hit EQ first. I know a lot of people are like EQ after compression, all that, but I am gonna start with Pro Q. Very cool for making really big kick drums. I'm actually gonna do like a brick wall limiter, and it's gonna resonate at the sub frequency of the kick, whatever I set it at. So you can hear it's like an 808 at that point. I want it really subby. Granted, I'm using headphones, so 30 might be insane right now. Taking out a little bit of that, it's getting really punchy. Yeah. And then I don't even know if I'll need to compress that. I might just use a transient designer. Using kilohertz. I don't mess with the attack that much unless I like really, honestly, if I need to take away attack, I mess with it. A lot of spin. Dial back. That kick is insane. Honestly, that's probably a little much. So I might. It's like giving. God, I told you all I love low end. I might drop it a little low so it's not so resonant, because it's getting too much there. I don't need that. I can hear. You can hear that tom ringing. Actually, if I wanted to, I could compress that, blow it out, and it would sound an amazing drum sound. But I want this really, really tight. I'm gonna just take a little bit of that low end out real quick. I might want to crunch that hat up a little bit. I'm actually gonna use, this is one of my favorite thing about Soundtoys plugins, is I mainly just use them as saturators when they're like the pitch shift or the delays or anything like that. So I'm gonna do the primal tap. And I'm not gonna use the delay. You can hear it's now just gonna be a saturator. But I'm only gonna use it a little bit. But you can really get some interesting tones. If you start to like, the breakup on this, especially on like floor toms or low end, is really cool. So I'm just gonna I just want a little bit of crunch. I'm gonna add an H delay on the snare. That's like one of my favorite, not dubbed out. I'm gonna get it really tight. It's gonna sound weird at first, but it's gonna give us that room tone. I am a huge fan of using delays instead of reverbs for like ambience. Really, really dig that sound in general. I think I do need to compress that snare a little bit. Right now, it's falling a little flat. Sounds good, but these 1176. Can do it longer. I might do it a little faster. It's getting a little splatty right off the bat, so. You know, there's no like right way to do it. It's just right now I can hear that some of that stuff is just like crushing it a little bit. This, I already EQ'd this on the way in, so I'm gonna EQ this one after the compressor. There's a big mid-rangey that's a little much, but who knows? I might embrace it. Bring a little in. Let's see if I can do. See if the brick wall sounds good here too. Oh my god, it sounds like a power tom. Brick wall not needed. I got my like solo tracks like sounding pretty good. Maybe just a little bit of SSL comp. Try fast attack real quick. Yeah, that gets a little exciting. You can also hear how that kick's coming out a little bit too much now. Drop it down a little bit. Adjust my limiter so that I'm hitting that kind of like -1 ceiling. This is generally what we expect at Splice, especially if you're turning in sample packs, to be like right about there. God, that kick is insane. I have to go even lower. All right, I know a lot of you have caught on by now. I'm not the only one who's thought about this, but it's one of my favorite tricks. I actually use Echo Boy as a saturator also. Time mode, 0 milliseconds, mix all the way up, and you can just get the most insane distortion, super lo-fi stuff. It sounds amazing. Soundtoys does not pay me to say this. I love them. I've used them for years. Highly encourage their stuff, but I love the CU1 chorus. That's like one of my favorites. And I'll use this on guitars, keys, everything. This isn't the vibe specifically for drums. I think I'm gonna go back to that one. Here we go, back to 0 time. So this right now, the highest fidelity, it's just a little bit. You can hear that. The top end, honestly, the top end's great, but I might want a little bit of that. I want some of that grit. The low end's a little crispy. Honestly, I think that's pretty solid. Might do a little more delay. Maybe the problem with that is a little too much. I love it so much, but it's not the vibe. So this is good to go. I'm gonna bounce that. Thank you all for having me. I'm Dylan Wood. Love to share anything that I can with y'all, and I hope to see y'all again soon.